It is late on a humid summer night in the upscale suburban enclave of Davidson County, North Carolina. The warm air clings to every surface, and the faint hum of distant air conditioning units thrums softly in the background. Streetlights cast a pale glow across manicured lawns and well-tended hedges, and inside a spacious two-story home situated near the golf course in the River Run community, a quiet stillness blankets the rooms. This is an affluent neighborhood, known for its serene green spaces and a relative sense of safety. Tonight, however, that calm will be shattered. In the early hours of August 2015, a phone call will pierce the silence. Within these walls, a violent confrontation has taken place, and by the time the local authorities arrive, an Irish businessman, a man who came to this country to start anew after heartbreak, will be found lifeless. His name is Jason Corbett, and his story will soon become the focus of countless headlines, court proceedings, and heart-wrenching family disputes on both sides of the Atlantic. At precisely 3:05 a.m., according to the official reports, a frantic call reaches the 911 operator. Outside, the air is still sticky with late summer heat, hovering around 75 degrees Fahrenheit, with no rainfall that night and the skies mostly clear. On the line is a man whose voice is tense, controlled, yet urgent. He identifies himself as Thomas Martens, a visitor in the home. He sounds breathless. He claims there has been an altercation. He says he struck his son-in-law with a baseball bat to defend his daughter. The details are jumbled, but he insists it was necessary. The operator dispatches local emergency responders immediately. The first person to discover the terrible scene inside the house is in fact Thomas Martens himself. He reports finding his son-in-law, Jason Corbett, in a state of violent rage, attacking Molly Corbett, his daughter. It is a shocking claim that stands in stark contrast to the image the community had of Jason, a man who seemed friendly, stable, and devoted to his children. Yet in these first moments, all that is known is that a grave act of violence has taken place. Within minutes, uniformed officers and paramedics approach the property. Their flashlights scan the driveway, reflecting off glass windows. They secure the perimeter, ensuring that no one leaves the scene. Neighbors who wake to the flashing blue and red lights step out onto their front lawns, concerned whispers passing through the stillness. It is now around 3:20 a.m. The first responders enter the home and find Jason Corbett unresponsive, showing no signs of life. There are visible head injuries. The room has signs of a struggle, but the full narrative is not yet clear. As the paramedics pronounce Jason Corbett dead, officers begin talking to the two people present: Molly Corbett, his second wife, and her father, Thomas Martens. Martens' story is that he feared for his daughter's life and intervened. He claims self-defense and defense of his daughter. Molly is shaken, providing fragmented statements, indicating she felt threatened and terrified. Meanwhile, the first officers on the scene notice that the house is otherwise orderly, the children asleep upstairs. They keep everyone separated, recording initial impressions. A ring of police tape now encloses the property. By morning's first light, the local media and curious neighbors will be speculating about what happened inside the Corbett home. Davidson County, nestled in central North Carolina, is not a place typically associated with brutal crimes. The population, at the time just over 1,600, largely enjoys a peaceful existence. The River Run area, with its neatly laid out homes and verdant golf courses, attracts families seeking safety, good schools, and a community spirit. Violent crime here is low, and neighbors know each other well enough to greet one another on walks. While the state and region have their share of history, textile mills once fueled local economies, and in recent years the population grew as more families moved into suburban developments. The kind of crime discovered tonight would send shockwaves through the community. In the months leading up to this incident, the community had enjoyed a relatively quiet season. Local police blotters mostly concerned traffic violations or the occasional burglary. Serious crimes rarely dominated headlines. Economically, the region was stable, anchored by steady employment. Socially, families invested time in youth sports, local church groups, and volunteer activities. No one imagined that a family dispute would escalate into a homicide. The death of an Irish businessman at the hands of his American wife and her father would ignite numerous discussions about domestic violence, cross-cultural marriages, custody battles, and the thin line between self-defense and murder. As the sun rose on August 2, 2015, the community braced itself for the unfolding of a grim and complicated story. Jason Michael Corbett, born in Limerick, Ireland, had just entered his 40s at the time of his death. He stood around 6 feet tall, a lean build, with warm, expressive eyes and a friendly smile. Dark-haired, he carried himself with confidence that came naturally to someone who had navigated significant life changes with a sense of purpose. Jason's childhood in Ireland was modest, but loving. He grew up surrounded by close family ties, developing a strong sense of kinship and responsibility. His early life was shaped by communal values. Neighbors knew each other by name, and family gatherings were frequent and lively. Jason's academic journey included stints at local schools in Limerick, where he was considered bright, hard-working, and sociable. He was not one to shy away from a challenge. In his early adulthood, he ventured into the business world, taking on roles in various firms, before finding a niche in packaging solutions. By the time he relocated to the United States, he had established himself as a dedicated professional. Before coming to North Carolina, Jason worked for a packaging company in Ireland, earning a reputation as a problem solver who could handle client relations with tact and sincerity. Life dealt Jason a painful blow when his first wife, Margaret, passed away tragically young from an illness, leaving him a widower with 2 small children. This loss forged in him a profound resilience. He stepped up to be both father and mother to his children, ensuring they had structure, stability, and love. It was during his quest to find a caregiver for his children that he met Molly, who initially worked as their nanny in Ireland. Over time, they grew close, eventually marrying and relocating to North Carolina. Professionally, he landed a good position with a company in the packaging industry, forging strong relationships with colleagues who appreciated his honesty, work ethic, and easygoing charm. He dreamed of building a stable, loving environment for his children. He hoped to provide them with opportunities, good education, and a secure future. The move to the United States represented a fresh chapter after hardship. He worked diligently, often traveling for business, and tried to integrate into his new community by participating in local gatherings, occasionally joining colleagues for a round of golf, and building professional networks that extended beyond state lines. By 2015, Jason had adapted well to American life, though he still carried within him the deep-rooted Irish traditions of family loyalty and warm hospitality. He had recently mentioned plans to take the children back to Ireland for a visit, wanting them to remain connected to their roots. He had hopes for professional growth, a larger home, perhaps even building a consulting venture of his own. Socially, Jason was a family man. His closest ties were to his children and siblings back in Ireland. He stayed connected through calls, emails, and social media. He had developed friendships with neighbors and colleagues who described him as approachable and kind. With Molly, he tried to forge a new life of mutual support, though tensions had reportedly emerged in their marriage. Still, he remained dedicated to making it work, preferring communication to confrontation. Jason's romantic life was marked first by a strong and loving marriage to Margaret, cut short by her untimely death. Mourning and caring for his children, he took a thoughtful approach to entering a new relationship. Meeting Molly, who cared for his children as a nanny in Ireland, felt like a natural progression. Over time, that relationship deepened. However, as some friends would later note quietly, Jason seemed increasingly anxious about certain aspects of the new marriage. The issue of legal custody of his children and his will were sources of stress. Still, he rarely aired his marital grievances openly. Professionally, Jason's network included colleagues in the packaging industry and business acquaintances throughout the region. He was well liked at the office, often the one to diffuse tense negotiations with a reassuring smile or a well-placed joke. Outside of work, he engaged with the local Irish community, sometimes attending cultural events. His social media presence was moderate. He posted occasional family photographs, the kids at a park, a shot of the golf course, a proud moment when his daughter brought home a handmade school project. He seemed intent on blending his Irish heritage with his new American setting, preserving what he held dear while embracing what the future offered. In his final days, Jason's routine remained steady. In the last 48 hours leading up to that fateful night, Jason had followed his regular pattern. On Friday, he had a work meeting in the morning and spent much of the afternoon finalizing a client proposal. He texted a colleague around 5 p.m., confirming a meeting scheduled for the following week. After dinner with Molly and the children, he put the kids to bed early. Security camera footage from a local store showed him picking up groceries that afternoon: milk, cereal, fresh fruit, routine purchases for a family weekend. Credit card records reflected a modest transaction at the supermarket and a filling station. Phone records indicated a brief call to his sister in Ireland, a check-in that lasted about 15 minutes, in which he cheerfully recounted plans to have a quiet weekend at home. Saturday flowed similarly. Jason stayed close to home. He played with the children in the backyard, enjoying the warm weather. A neighbor who spotted him noted he seemed in good spirits, waving hello as he walked toward the garage to fetch a soccer ball. Online records indicate he had logged on to his work email in the early afternoon, responding to a client's query. By Saturday evening, nothing seemed amiss. He watched television with the family. Late that night, a security camera down the street captured the faint light of the Corbett home's upstairs rooms flickering off sometime around midnight, suggesting everyone had retired for the evening. In his communications, Jason had recently expressed some stress to a friend overseas. Details about legalities concerning his children's guardianship weighed on him. He felt a need to ensure the children's future was secure. He had not indicated any immediate fears, nor had he suggested he felt physically threatened by anyone in the household. If anything, his tone was determined. He wanted them to thrive. Professionally, he looked forward to a stable career path and was considering further certifications or training within his field. Emotionally, Jason had been stable and calm in recent weeks, though subtle changes might have been detectable to those who knew him intimately. He was protective of his children's well-being and had expressed disappointment over certain domestic disagreements, issues about how to raise the kids, or subtle cultural differences between him and Molly. Financially, he was secure, earning a steady salary that allowed a comfortable lifestyle. He had no known serious debts or legal troubles. He had plans to revisit Ireland before year's end, hoping to give the children a dose of their roots and perhaps find a renewed sense of belonging. In private conversations, he mentioned feeling a bit isolated in North Carolina. He loved many aspects of his new life, but there was a lingering sense of being far from home. Despite these feelings, he remained optimistic. He envisioned a future that blended both worlds, raising children who would inherit both Irish resilience and American opportunity. Recent talks with family hinted that he might seek clearer legal assurances regarding his children's custody. Some discussions touched on the possibility of returning to Ireland, yet, as of the last day anyone saw him alive, he had not indicated any imminent move. To those who observed him at work and in the neighborhood, Jason seemed as steady and dedicated as ever. Across the same threshold, in a house now forever changed, lived Molly Martens Corbett, around 10 years younger than Jason, and her father, Thomas Martens. Molly was slender, blonde, and of average height, presenting a poised demeanor that suggested confidence. She hailed from a well-established American family. Her father, Thomas Martens, had enjoyed a long career as an FBI agent before retirement. They were well-educated, financially comfortable, and carried the bearing of people accustomed to order and methodical thinking. The researchers include 17-year-old men who died with cheekbones from alcoholism. Molly grew up in a structured environment. Her education took her through reputable schools and a university where she studied fields that allowed her to work with children. This path led her to Ireland, where she met Jason as a nanny to his children. She had a history of being drawn to caring roles, teaching, nannying, volunteering. Yet beneath that gentle outward persona, friends said Molly could be strong-willed, and sometimes anxious. After her marriage to Jason, she moved to North Carolina and settled into a comfortable life, though it was reported by some acquaintances that she struggled to fully adjust to stepmotherhood and to the responsibilities that came with it. Financially, the family appeared stable, largely through Jason's income, but Molly also had access to her family's resources. Thomas Martens, who on the night of the crime was visiting his daughter, was a retired FBI agent. Tall, solidly built, with silvering hair, he presented a figure of quiet authority. His career in the Bureau spanned decades, during which he handled various cases and developed a reputation for discipline and precision. Family and neighbors considered him a law and order figure, someone who believed in doing things by the book. Since retirement, he spent his time enjoying a more relaxed life, but remained vigilant and protective over his family, especially Molly. Psychologically, both Molly and Thomas would later face intense scrutiny. Although no official diagnoses were public, defense teams painted them as people thrust into a violent confrontation, forced to defend themselves and Molly's children. Prosecution and others saw it differently. They considered that Molly, feeling insecure about her relationship and custody of Jason's children, might have harbored resentment or fear. Thomas, always protective of his daughter, might have come prepared to do whatever it took to rescue her from a situation he perceived as untenable. As neighbors and distant acquaintances offered conflicting views. Some said Molly was a kind young woman who tried her best to bond with Jason's children, while others suggested friction, disagreements over discipline and routine, caused tension. Thomas was known to be a disciplined man, but his presence in the house that night was curious. Why was he there? He had traveled from out of state and chose a late-night visit. "How do you do, Papa?" Investigators would later question whether Molly or her father showed signs of having planned something beforehand. From a psychological standpoint, Molly's behavior in the months leading to the crime seemed somewhat erratic. Online searches, as investigators would find, touched on various sedatives and custody issues. She felt, as some would suggest, that Jason might take the children away. If that fear became irrational or overwhelming, it might have contributed to a desperate act. Thomas, for his part, had witnessed countless human dramas in his FBI career, but there was no record that he had a tendency toward violence. Yet that night, he wielded a baseball bat with lethal consequences. In the community, Molly and Thomas were not deeply integrated. The neighbors knew them as a family who mostly kept to themselves. Molly had no notable criminal background. Thomas, a law enforcement veteran, had a spotless record. Yet, beneath the calm surface, there were subtle clues. A friend recalled Molly mentioning her frustrations that Jason did not sign paperwork that would give her full legal rights as the children's mother. There were hints of tension over money, insurance policies, and the possibility of returning to Ireland. Some acquaintances of Thomas described him as old school and fiercely protective, someone who might see threats where others saw domestic disagreements. Shortly before the murder, a local man named Stephen B. Anthony marched straight Thomas's home. Leading up to the night of the crime, did either perpetrator display unusual behavior? Thomas's arrival in North Carolina coincided with a tense period in the Corbett household. Molly seemed nervous, pacing at times, fixated on legal documents related to custody. Thomas might have made cryptic comments about resolving the situation. Digital footprints would show that Molly searched online for questions related to head injuries and sedation. Thomas, as far as known, had not exhibited overt suspicious behavior, but his presence and involvement at the crime scene indicated a willingness to use force. No official record detailed previous crimes by either Molly or Thomas, but investigators considered other signs. Might Molly have tried to poison or sedate Jason before? Toxicology reports would later be examined closely. The murder weapon, a baseball bat belonging to Thomas, might have been brought into the home earlier, possibly as a form of self-defense. There were no public records of domestic abuse calls prior to that night, but private tensions likely simmered. Could the pair have rehearsed their story, planning to claim self-defense if events reached a breaking point? In the days before the crime, financial transactions and communication patterns might tell a story. Molly stopped by a hardware store, buying items that seemed innocent on their own. Thomas's travel arrangements might have been spur of the moment or meticulously planned. Phone records would show the father and daughter in contact more frequently than usual. Witnesses would later recall Thomas's demeanor as watchful, as if waiting for something to happen. As the timeline approached that fatal early morning, the stage was quietly set for a violent confrontation, though the exact trigger would remain in dispute. On the night of the killing, tensions apparently came to a head. Investigators would reconstruct events, but their exact sequence remained contested. The home at River Run was quiet, save for muffled voices. According to the defense, Jason allegedly became enraged and attacked Molly. According to prosecutors, the evidence indicated a planned ambush. Either way, what happened in those pivotal moments would become the crux of this case. Thomas Martens said he walked in on his son-in-law choking Molly and was forced to intervene. He admitted to striking Jason repeatedly with the bat. Molly claimed she acted in self-defense as well, grabbing a paving brick. The crime scene told a brutal story. Multiple blows to Jason's head suggested something beyond a single protective strike. Outside, the weather was still warm, around 70 degrees, and the street was silent at that hour. The house stood along a manicured golf course community where muffled sounds rarely drew attention. Inside, the furniture remained mostly undisturbed, except for the area where the altercation occurred. The lighting was dim, the overhead lamp casting shadows across the living room. Forensic teams would later note blood patterns and try to establish the order of attacks. The front door was locked, no sign of forced entry. The windows closed. No neighbors reported hearing screams, though one recalled a vague thump, easily dismissed as something falling inside a household. The method of the attack was forceful and personal. A baseball bat, swung repeatedly, left devastating injuries. The victim's skull was fractured. Molly's role, using a brick, remained unclear. Why a brick was inside the home's bedroom area raised questions. Jason's body was discovered in a downstairs bedroom, partially dressed in sleepwear. The defensive wounds on his arms suggested he'd tried to shield himself. This was not a quick confrontation. It took precious minutes, enough time for someone to call the police earlier if needed. Instead, Thomas's 911 call came after the event concluded. After the crime, both Molly and Thomas appeared oddly composed. Thomas, as a former FBI agent, knew how to handle emergencies. He spoke calmly to the operator, though he asserted self-defense from the start. Molly was distraught, but not inconsolable. Her statements vacillated between fear and confusion. Paramedics confirmed Jason's death at the scene. The first responders found a gruesome but localized crime scene. Blood spatter analysis would later become crucial evidence. The media, alerted by scanners and tips, began to converge as dawn approached, quietly setting up cameras down the block, respecting police lines. Families waking that Sunday morning found yellow tape and patrol cars framing their picturesque street. As the news spread, the community reacted with disbelief and sorrow. Immediate speculation suggested a domestic dispute gone wrong. Comments from neighbors, relayed to local reporters, expressed shock. They seemed like a normal family, and I can't believe something like this happened here. Others were more guarded, noting they rarely saw Jason and Molly outside together. The Irish community in North Carolina, and indeed back in Ireland, would soon learn of the tragedy through phone calls and social media. Jason's family members, still in Ireland, would awake to devastating news, their grief compounded by distance. In the hours that followed, Molly and Thomas were separated and taken to the sheriff's office for questioning. Investigators photographed everything: blood patterns, bruises, the angle of the wounds, the household's layout, even the children's bedrooms. Detectives began piecing together a timeline. They examined phone records and talked to relatives. They discovered tensions over Jason's decision not to sign documents that would grant Molly legal rights over his children. Jason's family in Ireland would say he was hesitant to finalize adoption paperwork, because he wanted the children's best interests protected. To them, the murder would appear premeditated, a final solution to custody disputes.
The evidence trail was extensive. Digital footprints showed Molly researching sedatives and possible ways to incapacitate someone without leaving obvious traces. Thomas's role was scrutinized. Was he merely a protective father acting in the heat of the moment, or was he complicit in a plan to eliminate Jason? Witness statements from neighbors who saw Thomas arrive earlier in the weekend raised questions. Why come unannounced, late at night?
The initial responding officers preserved every piece of evidence. Forensic experts processed bloodstains, bat fractures, and splinters. The medical examiner's report detailed multiple severe head trauma points inconsistent with a single defensive blow. The presence of the children, who slept through the event, added another layer of tragedy. Custody battles would ensue. Jason's siblings in Ireland mobilized to bring the children home, citing the horror of what occurred. Within 48 hours of the homicide, investigators compiled witness lists and set interviews. They pressed Molly and Thomas for details. A narrative discrepancy emerged. Thomas said he hit Jason once to protect Molly. Forensic evidence indicated many strikes. The prosecution began forming a theory of murder rather than self-defense. Media outlets picked up the story, broadcasting images of the victim, emphasizing his Irish origins, and highlighting the shocking nature of a father-in-law killing his daughter's husband. As the forensic work continued, detectives carefully packaged evidence, took DNA swabs, and searched digital devices. They combed through emails, texts, and Molly's diary entries, if any, searching for a motive. The legal battle took shape. Public interest skyrocketed. International journalists followed the story, given Jason's Irish roots, and his family's outraged response. The community, which prided itself on safety, looked inward with unease. Could this have been prevented? Over the following days, the state built a case to charge Molly and Thomas. Experts weighed in, some suggesting that the force used far exceeded self-defense. Financial records showed no immediate gain from Jason's death, but life insurance policies and custody issues might have influenced actions. Custody of the children became an urgent concern. Jason's relatives arrived from Ireland to ensure they were safe, initiating legal proceedings to take them overseas. Molly's supporters argued she was terrified, trapped in an abusive relationship, but no police reports of abuse were found. Friends of Jason disputed that narrative, insisting he was gentle and caring. The forensic analysis was meticulous. DNA testing confirmed that Jason's blood was on the bat and brick as expected. But did the pattern of spatter match the self-defense story? Experts concluded it did not. The angle and force of blows indicated a sustained attack while Jason was incapacitated. No drugs were found in his system. Phone data indicated no calls for help before the killing. Thomas, trained in FBI protocols, would know to call for help if truly acting in the moment. Instead, the call came afterward. This was a critical point the prosecution would raise. In a matter of weeks, investigators had enough evidence to charge both Molly and Thomas with second-degree murder. They were arrested and booked, each entering the justice system from the opposite side than Thomas ever imagined. The pretrial phase began with preliminary hearings. Attorneys for the defendants argued that they acted out of fear for Molly's life. The prosecution countered with the brutality of the attack. It became a legal battle that attracted intense media scrutiny. Before the trial, there were negotiations. Bail hearings unfolded against a backdrop of public fascination. Defense lawyers tried to frame Jason as an aggressor, but his record and reputation were spotless. Motion filings challenged the admissibility of certain evidence. Jury selection took place amid careful vetting to ensure impartiality. Experts were lined up to testify: medical examiners, forensic analysts, and character witnesses. Both sides prepared for a trial that would hinge on whether the defendant's claim of self-defense held up under scientific and factual examination. As the trial opened, the prosecution laid out a meticulous timeline. They presented forensic evidence, showing that Jason's injuries resulted from multiple heavy blows. They introduced witness testimonies, neighbors who heard suspicious noises, colleagues of Jason who testified to his nature and stability, and experts who analyzed blood spatter and wound patterns. The prosecution sought to establish motive, suggesting Molly and Thomas wanted to remove Jason to gain control of the children's future. Defense attorneys countered, painting Jason as a volatile man capable of sudden violence. They presented their own experts to question the prosecution's findings. They tried to dismantle the timeline, suggesting that the attack happened in seconds, leaving no time for calls for help. They brought in character witnesses who said Molly was a loving stepmother and that Thomas was a protective father who would never commit murder unless he believed his daughter's life was in peril. Still, the defense struggled to explain the excessive force used, the suspicious online searches, and the lack of any prior complaints or reports that would substantiate their self-defense claim. As the trial advanced, both sides delivered closing arguments. The prosecution hammered home the idea that the force used was far beyond what was necessary. They insisted that Jason, in fact, was the victim of a planned and brutal assault. The defense attempted to raise reasonable doubt, highlighting the lack of direct eyewitnesses and the possibility that the event unfolded too quickly for measured responses. The jury deliberated, facing the heavy task of parsing truth from artful narrative. When the verdict came, the community reacted strongly. Molly and Thomas were found guilty of second-degree murder. The courtroom was charged with emotion. Jason's family, who traveled from Ireland, wept in relief and sorrow. Molly and Thomas stood stunned, their arguments of self-defense rejected. Yet this was not the end. Appeals would follow. Eventually their convictions would be overturned and they would enter Alfred pleas, maintaining innocence while acknowledging the prosecution had enough evidence to convict. After a series of legal twists, they would avoid a full retrial and walk free, leaving many in the community and abroad feeling justice was incomplete. In the immediate aftermath, the community struggled with the crime's impact. Vigils for Jason Corbett took place, with neighbors expressing solidarity with his grieving family. The children, returning to Ireland, found shelter and love with Jason's relatives. Safety concerns prompted some residents to invest in additional security measures. A sense of loss prevailed. This was a tragedy that did not fit the usual narrative of crime and punishment. Media coverage remained intense, dissecting each development and inspiring debates on domestic violence, custody rights, and the complexities of international marriages. For Jason's family, life would never be the same. They navigated legal systems in 2 countries, ensured the children's emotional recovery, and worked tirelessly to keep Jason's memory alive. Financial strains, caused by transatlantic travel and legal representation, took their toll. Yet they persisted, determined to highlight the injustice they believed had occurred. Over time, media interest waned, but not before memorial funds were established, and educational programs emerged to teach about the warning signs of domestic disputes turning lethal. In the long term, the case highlighted systemic issues. It spurred discussions about how courts handle international family dynamics, custody disputes, and claims of self-defense that mask deeper premeditation. Legal experts examined how forensic evidence can unmask false narratives. Policymakers considered adjustments to community outreach and support systems for families in conflict, aiming to prevent such tragedies. Law enforcement refined their approaches to domestic disturbances, though this case was not a straightforward domestic violence scenario. No prior reports, no documented pattern. It raised the question, how can a system prevent an unpredictable explosion of violence? Historically, the case of Jason Corbett's murder stands as a cautionary tale, a puzzle that challenges neat categorization. It will be studied by criminologists, law students, and sociologists interested in cross-cultural marriages, custody complexities, and forensic breakthroughs. The media attention, both local and international, cemented its place in true crime annals, ensuring that the lessons learned would guide future investigations and legal strategies. Today, the memory of Jason Corbett endures, in the hearts of his children, siblings, and friends. His life story, from Ireland to North Carolina, serves as a reminder that no community, however peaceful, is immune to tragedy. In acknowledging that fact, communities can continue to foster open dialogue, conflict resolution resources, and support systems for troubled families. The innovations in forensic technology and legal reforms that followed the case may prevent similar acts of violence, sparing other families the unbearable pain of loss. As we reach the end of this story, let us reflect on its complexities. A man traveled across an ocean, seeking a new start with his children and new wife. Instead, he met a violent end, in what should have been a safe haven. A father and daughter claimed self-defense, only to face damning forensic evidence. A community learned that truth can be elusive, motives hidden, and justice messy. Yet there is value in understanding every angle of such a case. Thank you for joining this in-depth exploration of the tragic fate of Jason Corbett. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime stories. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments section below. If you're interested in learning about other high-profile cases that shed light on family dynamics and the role of forensic evidence, consider looking into similar cases with contested self-defense claims. Let's keep the conversation going, ensuring that this story and its lessons are not forgotten.